I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm in celebration mode. Celebrate good times. Come on. Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate.
What are we
celebrating, Diane?
What are we celebrating?
I'm wondering if any of our listeners out there know what we're celebrating, for any of those diehards that have been with us from the beginning of this journey that we've been on. We're celebrating
1 year of the YDIGAF podcast. So I just believe it's been a year. I looked at the calendar the other day and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I could not believe it.
So that's the thing, right? That's one of the things that all of us are experiencing in this moment, is that time is flying by.
Oh.
It seems to be going so much more quickly. I think as technology is expanding and growing and we're having like more access and resource to things, it just seems like you turn around and there's something new happening in every single moment of the day. And so time is not moving slowly. We're in a year of our journey together. And what are the exciting statistics that you want to share, that you shared with me, saying, oh, it's a year and look at what we've done and accomplished?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I was looking at all, because as our listeners may or may not know, we are on several different platforms and we have a couple of different versions of this. So we do an audio version that you might be listening to through your different platforms that you get to your audio podcast from, but we also do video. We do YouTube version of our podcast. We started doing that, I think it was July of 2024. We started doing video versions. So there's lots of different ways to get us. And so the audio version, I was looking at some numbers. We've gotten 817 downloads in 1 year, which
Say it again.
817.
People are interested in what we're talking about.
817. I can't believe it. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is 19 countries. There are people that are listening to us from 19 countries. And I know you got a list of those countries. You want to read off some of them?
I got a list of those countries. I do. So we have Hungary, we have Bangladesh, we have Malaysia, Canada, Singapore, Russia, Ukraine, Japan, UK, Mexico, Brazil, Jamaica, of course, China, Australia, Finland, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Vietnam. So thank you all for giving AF about what we're talking about, and we are very curious to learn about what our connections and negotiations are with those countries across the globe. Really exciting conversation.
I'm super excited about Ukraine, and they've just recently joined the listenership. So shout out to Ukraine.
Welcome.
And and the Netherlands, fun fact, was our very first international listener. So whoever
that makes sense, though, because the Netherlands go hard. That makes absolute sense, because anytime I visited, we both love being in the Netherlands, so that makes sense that there's an alignment and a connection with people from that area.
Shout out to our listeners in the Netherlands, because you guys were the first international listeners. So we appreciate you for sure.
We do. We do. And then all the other countries, I mean, we know all of the things that are going on in our current social political status happening, with China and all of our tariffs and debts and the impact that's going on, that people are experiencing now, that they might not have understood what the impact is going to look like, knowing that there's a conversation about taking over Canada. And
Canada. I've got family there. So we're not going to be calling you the 51st state here. Why do I respect you? We respect you as a sovereign nation. Yes, we do. Or at least part of the Commonwealth. Those colonizers, the Brits, they can't seem to. We love Canada, and we appreciate all of the listeners there. So, And of course, the Russians are listening, which is interesting.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
I remember the first time I saw, because I look at the list routinely, I'm just curious. And I remember the first time I saw Russia on there, I thought, oh, it's a bot, but I don't know. To any of our listeners out there that might be in Russia that are listening, we do appreciate you listening. If
we
you
appreciate you listening. There's a
are.
whole contingency of like Russian Jamaicans here,
Mm,
that are on the island that I'm sure like are, politically astute. And it's just also like an interesting because I'm curious. I don't know what's happening in Russia. I've never been there. I mean, I know war is happening in Russia, but I'm just talking about like socially what's happening in Russia. And I'm curious if there is a curiosity about, relationships between folks that are white identified and other identified. And
mm,
if that negotiation happens there in Russia, or is there this very nationalist ideology like we have in Jamaica? Jamaica has an entire variety of spectrum of people who call themselves Jamaican. Is that same type of thing happening in Russia? And what does that look like as far as
I'm
it being a
curious.
melting pot or not? I have no idea, just no context to that.
Well, if any of our listeners, if you are listening to the audio version of this and you're in Russia, shoot on over to YouTube if you have access, and leave us a comment and see. I would love to know that because you're right. We have no idea what's happening in other countries and whether or not they experience a similar version of race and class differences that we experience here in on colonized Turtle Island, aka the United States. So,
Yeah, I don't think the social hierarchies that exist across the globe have the same level of iteration that you see in on US territory.
yeah,
But I do think that there are various versions of hierarchy across the world that do fall under capitalism
yeah.
and domination and oppression. And so, speaking of, like, did we ever speak about what happened in the Oval Office when the president of Ukraine came through? Did we ever speak about
We
that?
touched on it last in our last episode. And have you had a chance to watch it since the last time? Because I know when we talked about it before, you hadn't had a chance to see it.
No, but there was so much chatter. I didn't like watch specifically the dynamics that occurred,
Yeah,
but there was so much chatter about, you know, about what occurred.
yeah, yeah.
But yes, I, it becomes really difficult and hard for me to source and look for those things on social media because I'm not ever confident that I'm getting it raw and
Mm,
live. You know
mm,
what I mean? Like
mhm.
but when you go and look for it to be repeated,
Yeah.
it's people have always put some extra components on it. And then I'm also, since I'm off of US territory, I don't have access to all of the same things that you guys have access to.
Right, right. Yeah. That's why I try. I mean, as hard as it is for me to listen to his voice or anybody that is closely adjacent to him, I try to watch these things in real time because you're right.
Yeah,
It's
man.
hard to find a source, just the raw audio or video of whatever it is you're trying to, you want to see what actually happened and not somebody's interpretation of it, even though sometimes those interpretations are really, they're spot on and interesting and I learn things from them. I often like to see that stuff in real time with my own brain so that I can process it based on what I'm watching. And, it's interesting. I was thinking about today.
Mm,
Yesterday, I participated in an art show here locally, and it was a celebration of women. So it was all women artists. And we had some poets come through, and we had some music. And one of the poets dropped out. And so I was invited to read some of my poetry. And we were raising money for the Center for Family Justice, which is
okay.
a domestic violence survivors organization here locally in Bridgeport, Connecticut is where I live. And so we were raising money for them. And one of the poems that I read is titled Domestic Violence, and it's from my memoir. So if any of you have gone to my website, you can see my memoir is Under the Radar: When Truth Hides in Plain Sight. As I read the book, poems came up, and so by the end of the writing of the memoir, I had enough poems to put one in between each chapter. So it's kind of two books in one, and so it was interesting after I read that poem and after being there and talking to the president of the Center for Family Justice. And I was just drawing the parallel. The reason I said all that is I was drawing the parallel between being, as a survivor of domestic violence in a marriage and in my household growing up. It resonates with me based on what we're all going through right now with this political system, with the things that we're hearing, with the atrocities that are happening and our government's involvement in it. It just drew a
Ooh,
lot of parallels for me. And I was thinking
yeah.
about the Oval Office meltdown and thinking about how that was really a very violent experience,
Mm,
how I remember when he was in office before, how triggering that whole first term was for me as a survivor of domestic violence. So that was just something that has been swirling around in my brain since yesterday, because we really are experiencing a level of that, and some more than others for sure. But
I you bring this up, and as you were speaking it, I love when we are in alignment because my brain started to think about right, like individual domestic violence interpersonal violence that you have, like in your nuclear family connection or your nuclear community connections, not just family connections, but community connections. And then what does domestic violence on a global level look like?
yeah,
And who is the aggressor of that level of violence? And that is when I talk about the chatter that's happening outside of US territory. I am talking about like people really recognizing the systems of violence that are coming out of the US we are because we are our leaders are being very, very transparent
hmm,
about what their positionality is and their relationship and what they give AF about,
right.
right? So, like even in the last conversation, the last address, it wasn't the State of the Union address. It was like the 45-day presidential office
Yes,
address.
we call it the joint session of Congress, presidential address to the joint session of Congress. So,
And during that period of time, Donald Trump is outlining all the things. There were so many things in that conversation to joint Congress that I saw that was a violation. But one thing that stood out, and because we were talking about all of our listeners from across the globe,
mm,
one of the major impacts that I'm seeing and this sort of being able to attribute it to domestic violence is that there is so much of our relationship building with soft power and support that is being rolled back. And a
yeah.
majority of those dollars are coming from the African continent. And I thought that that was interesting, especially because Donald Trump specifically started to name who was getting money for resources to do things. And a majority of the countries that he named were on the African continent.
Yeah.
And I'm also giving AF about what's happening on the African continent because as that's happening, to your point in previous episodes, Deanne, is that having Donald Trump as the head of this Project 2025 strategy that is existing also is a major wake-up call for the rest of the globe and what their responsiveness to the US territory is going to look like. And what we see in that is this major unification of African countries happening right now and being led by some very young and innovative folks that are recognizing the autonomy and the wealth of resource that has been raped and robbed from the continent for such a long period of time. And it's really exciting to see like that transformation is also very interesting. I'm not so excited about it because I'm not so familiar with all of the components of it, but to see how China is then responding to the tariffs,
Mm.
and like the US having its position as a superpower in the way that it had when they thought America was great, the way that they're trying to make America great again.
Yeah, yeah. Back then.
It's not having the same reaction. It's not having the same responsiveness that so my point being is that what you thought was in the past that is able to happen in the present is not at all the context of how people are responding on a global scale. And
Mhm.
that's really interesting to look at. And it's really interesting to look at as we think about how technology is providing more connections on a global level for people that for the masses, right?
Mhm.
So like we still know that there is this push. We still know in the way that we are experiencing that there is this very strong push for this very kind of um, um, neo-Confederate white
Yeah.
uh, leadership that is coming into place that is being elected all across the world, but then you have the masses that are talking to each other all across the world as well. And so you see the mobilization and the unification happening. And it's really going to be interesting because the US is not getting the responsiveness or the positionality that it used to have on a global scale, either economically or socially. And politically, it's doing what it does. And we see the impact of that.
Yeah, I was listening this morning and hearing that, all of Europe has responded very strongly against the tariffs, and the person that I was listening to was speaking to a representative from Kentucky, which
Mm.
Kentucky bourbon, all alcohol that's produced in the US is now being tariffed quite a bit, which I don't drink, so that won't impact me directly, but I can imagine that it's going to get very expensive to drink, especially in places other than the United States, because the countries are just like, no, we're not going to take it. We're not going to buy your stuff. We're going to, and states like Kentucky, which heavily depend, I mean, Kentucky's one of our poorest states in the United States. And so,
That's my Jack Daniel that's produced in Kentucky, right?
yeah, the Kentucky
Or no,
bourbon,
that's Tennessee. That's Tennessee. Jack
yeah,
Daniels is Tennessee whiskey.
I believe it's
Love me some Jack
Tennessee.
Daniels.
Kentucky bourbon, and
Oh, right. Okay.
it was interesting because they were breaking it down. I could care less about alcohol because I don't drink, but they were breaking it down about how it's going to impact. It's not just, right, the people that would drink the bourbon, it's the farmers that make the malt and the wheat and the barley and all the things that go into making it, and the folks that transport the products to get there to make it and then transport the finished bourbon out to the other places. There are so many different agencies and industries that get touched by just one product, and all of these things are being impacted by these tariffs that the world is pushing back on, and rightly so. I mean, it's a very interesting. I haven't had too many conversations with people who are like all gung ho about what he's doing, but I think people are really going to start to feel the impacts in their own pocketbooks, in their own backyards, and in ways that I don't think people really have thought about in a lot of ways. We're so consumed by capitalism that we don't have a broad-based understanding of what tariffs do and how they can impact and what they're going to look like to our own grocery bills. So,
Our level of consumerism should really help us to like to see what the impact of these tariffs are going to be because we like our products. We
yeah.
like having what it is that we want to have when we want to have it. And I
Market,
know that that's, I mean, I live that reality because I'm on an island right now,
right, right.
right? And I can't get the ice cream that I want to get. And when I do get ice cream that is the choice that I'm giving, I'm paying 3 times the amount that I would pay in the US. Or like coming over, I brought seedless grapes and I brought 3 bags because me getting literally a handful of grapes like this cost me $12. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Or like the little packaged meat. So when you are on US territory and you are used to having everything that you want at your fingertips,
Mhm.
if you've traveled abroad and you want, to your point, a certain type of alcohol that you want to taste, if you want to have some type of meat, if you want to have a variety of grapes and fruits and all of those things, these type of tariffs that have been put forth through from the US are going to limit that level of variety that US consumers have. US consumers are not used to that. They haven't been,
Oh,
so trust and believe that there is going to be a huge amount of pushback on the ground. I also heard that there was some real major impact happening to Elon Musk. I want to bring that name into the conversation because when we're talking about capitalism, like he is like holding the cornerstone of like what capitalist ideology and hierarchy and domination looks like,
mhm.
and the impact even on someone like him where the Teslas in China now are not selling because they are made wherever they're made. Where's Tesla made? I don't even know.
There are factories here in the US because I know that I've been hearing about protesters that have, set fire to some of the Teslas
To
out
some of the Teslas,
and impacting it. So I don't know. He's probably got, factories all over
factories all over.
that'll save them
Mm.
money, I would imagine. But did you hear during Trump's address where he said he's going to lift the mandate on production of electric vehicles.
Yes, I did.
I
I
thought, well,
did.
your buddy's up there in the gallery, and he's probably not happy about that particular piece of news because that's going to
Hmm.
impact him because he makes the batteries and stuff. So he doesn't just make
Yeah, he
he,
makes the model
right,
electric car. Like when we talk
right.
about electric car, the first one that's going to come to mind to
Right.
us
But I think
is
he's also
Prius and Tesla.
he's also got his fingers into the batteries and the production lines, you know, the stuff that it would
Hmm.
take another production line to make electric cars. So if he's lifting the, and I might have that wrong, so correct me in the comments if I'm wrong,
But
but
I recall that was a
yeah.
part of what he was saying. Like,
So lifting that mandate means that, you know, that's a part that he's not that he's hurting for money. He's
you think?
yeah.
No, I don't think that he's hurting for money. But if he also, you know, what I imagine, because I don't know these people at all, but what we are seeing is that the evolution of the electric car is getting at a place where it's kind of plateauing, right? And it's also not having the outcomes that was expected and projected. And so if that is not a direction that we're going to go, or if we need some different way to power vehicles, or if the way that we're going to be transported is going to change, and he already knows that, then this is a really good way for him to not lose more money, right? If they make a mandate that you don't have to make any more production of like these cars and things like that, then he's
Yeah.
ahead of the game because he'll just be putting his finances into what it is that they do mandate
Right.
for us to be
I'm sure
participating in. If they even allow us to travel, y'all. I mean, I'm seeing like limitations happening, crossing borders and all of that kind of stuff coming, trying to get back and forth across to Jamaica now. There's much more barriers and stops, like the forms and the paperwork and the technology that is working with that. Things are like getting messed up. Lines are getting so much longer, getting entry.
yeah.
So like, if
Well,
you
that
are
has a
in
lot
the
to do with
movements,
that has a lot to do with federal workers being fired. Like I have
fired.
knew some folks that were coming back to the U.S. from the Dominican Republic, and they had to
Hmm.
wait through the customs lines to come back into the country for like 2 to 3 hours because
Hmm.
there were no federal
Not
workers.
enough.
So the lines are really long. So yeah, there's multiple reasons, and I'm sad about the electric car thing because I always thought that was, you know, a way to get away from fossil fuels and the emissions
Yeah,
that
man.
we put in the air and everything. But then I learned, you know, and have been learning, and maybe others have been too, about how we're mining the minerals in in the Congo for those
Mm-hmm.
batteries, you know, and the children and the child labor and the deaths and all of the horrific. So yeah, it's like we capitalism is such an insidious disease to everything because
Really is.
we don't seem to we just see the end. I'll say, I'll claim it for myself. I was excited about electric cars because I thought it solved the fossil fuels, and I had no clue where we were getting the minerals to create the batteries. And so now I know that, and I wish, you know, I wish we could grow a conscience with regard to this stuff. And maybe it's just that the capitalism itself is the ultimate cancer. I don't know.
Well, I definitely agree with capitalism being the ultimate cancer. I definitely agree with that. But then again, it brings me back to these levels of domestic violence that is occurring, or international violence that is occurring from U.S. territory, aggressing onto other communities, countries, people. The Again, the pushback is different. So capitalism is really there for all of the economists and all of the folks that have studied and researched like the impacts and or the benefits of capitalism. It always has this endpoint of being able to implode on itself because it creates such a huge gap of resources,
Right.
and there's just so many of us that it's not a sustainable situation. It's lasted a really long time, but now we just have more humans that are on the earth. We have used a lot more of our natural resources, and folks are recognizing, because of the level of communication that we have, are recognizing the distortion of like the history and the relationships of people, and pushing back. And so I'm going back to Ibrahim Traoré, who is really kicking people out. He's kicked France out. He has the AES, the African um I don't, ooh, I gotta find out what the name of the AES is. But I know it's like it's a an alliance that was built out of like some Paris Accords, an alliance of African countries, and more people, like every single day, there are more African countries that are joining this movement.
Mm,
And this movement is kicking the colonizers out of spaces and asking for demanding, not asking, demanding the reparations and saying you're not going to be able to rape our resources. And if we're going back to domestic violence, when you get to that place where you identify that you need to figure out how to be in your autonomy and you look to your community of support to help you get to that place, that is the type of transformational trend that we're seeing happen on a global basis.
mm,
And again, I'm going to go back to this being about your point as Donald Trump becomes the face of this white supremacy that they're trying to, and this new world order.
yep.
And that is what sparks and ignites people into action. We're
Mhm.
not doing such a good job on US territory. Like, right, we're still in the same motion because people in US territory are not realizing the impacts as quickly as other countries that are really going to be impacted about with our relationships, but it's happening in this moment, and this is what we're like getting to see if you're paying attention. And I love it. I love seeing France get out of here.
Oh,
I
I
love
know.
seeing we're
Yeah.
not going to allow you to take our resources. I love seeing that people are recognizing that they can develop their communities of support, their countries of support, and have their own alliances. And then there's also this like wonderful competition about like who's in world power, and then you see who has been using soft power to be supportive of countries. And it's unfortunate for the US, but China is doing a magnificent job of providing the resources to other countries and infrastructure to other countries, and then Russia has their hand in Africa, and we all know that Africa is the one of the is the largest continent and has so many of the resources. So it's like Africa recognizing that and recognizing its power in this position helps us to get back to the times of like the gold trade and when the resources were held by the countries and the communities with which held them, which they come from.
Yeah. Oh, I always get so excited when I hear people or governments or, folks from areas that have been classically just devoid of resources, just sucked dry of their resources over so many hundreds of years saying, no, you're not allowed in anymore. We're done with you. It's an amazing, if that's the movement, if that's where we're headed, that it's a beautiful thing to watch for sure. So, and I know there will be much more for us to talk about as we watch and see these things unfold. And as we are, what I would love for our listeners and our viewers to, I want us to be a community and a family. I want us to talk about these things. Why do we give? I'll say it. Why do we give a fuck about these things, about these issues that are happening? Because they're happening globally. We are seeing them, you and I are seeing them through a United States lens, and you now through a Jamaica lens. But they're impacted, they impact all of us. So for those of you who are here celebrating with us our 1 year anniversary, thank you for being here. And if you are watching us on YouTube, we would love, love, love for comments. We would love to hear what you're thinking, how any of these shows might have impacted you. Like, subscribe, share. That's how the algorithms work, and we can't do that without you. So, and for those of you who are listening on any of the listening podcast platforms, please leave a review. Please, let us know how you're feeling about this. And we're on Instagram as well, and TikTok, and Facebook. So there's lots of ways for you to get a hold of us, but we want to know what you guys are giving a fuck about so that we can talk about it, because
Yeah,
it's
man.
all of us together, right? It's all of us together.
Yeah.
And I want to
Yes.
say thank you to you, Jay, for being my partner on this journey for the past year. And
Yeah, man.
it's been a wonderful experience, and I can't wait to see where we go next. So
Absolutely. Me either. And just like, I love it being a model and a testament to when people are like actually building relationship with one another. And we can dream together in different ways and we can like, talk about different things. So I am, in alignment with you and being very curious on what other people give AF about so that we can talk about that and open up our conversation to bring in more perspectives. And I love being able to do that and give AF about things all across the globe because that's what we have to do now. We are a global community.
Happy
So,
1 year anniversary.
yes, to you too, my friend.
Why
Yeah.
do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks for
I
joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard?
continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
Why
fuck?
Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.